What is up, YouTube? My name is Paige, and thanks for joining me on my renewed reading journey. I did not film a book reviews video for the month of August or September. No book recaps. This is it. This is the August and September book recap video, and it all has to do with the books that were recommended to me by my loved ones, my friends, my family, people who I trust dearly when it comes to opinions on media. So today I'm going to discuss all the books that I read that were recommended to me by my family and friends. It took me way longer. This was going to be like an August video, and I'd planned on reading all of these books while I recovered from knee surgery. That didn't happen. I got kind of bogged down and was just very keen to get tons of books read, like while I was bedridden, essentially. But it was a lot harder than I thought, the reading, but also just like keeping myself centered and level, because honestly, recovering from major surgery where you can't move and when you're used to being so active is extremely challenging. And I didn't know that, but I didn't know the toll it would take on my mental health. And I'm very fortunate to have some very amazing people in my corner who, listen to my needs and my feelings and just kind of, help me through that. I really tried not to beat myself up about how long it took me to read some of these books. However, I want to now just share with you my opinions on all these books. This was a great idea. I know most people get their recommendations from people they know, but really I like the other method where you just kind of peruse and figure out what you want to read based on what the covers look like, or here and there what you hear about books. So this was kind of a new thing for me. So I'm going to start with a book that I don't have a physical copy of, but it was recommended by my mom, and that is Up a Road Slowly by Irene Hunt. I listened to this as an audiobook while I was inventorying my parents' tire business. So Up a Road Slowly is kind of like a coming of age novel. It's a very popular novel amongst people who were born in the late 60s and early 70s. This book is about a girl who is grieving the loss of her mother, and her whole family is grieving that loss. So her father sends her to live with her aunt because he thinks it'll be a more stable environment for her. Her aunt is a teacher, and we follow her academic learning journey, her journey towards love and experiencing affection in a new way from different people, building relationships. And she grows to the age of 17, and we just follow her along that journey. And I can understand why this is such a nostalgic book for people, why people loved it so much. There are some themes explored that definitely would be explored in different ways now, but all in all, it is kind of a quintessential coming of age story for young people. I wouldn't recommend it to a young person, but reading it in my 30s was totally a fine book and interesting kind of snapshot from, a time before I was alive. The audiobook was quite good, and it was available really only on audio unless I wanted to order it off of Amazon, which I did not. I gave Up a Road Slowly 3 stars. I could have given it less, but honestly, I just understood the value. Even though I wasn't a huge fan of the writing style and the story did drag in some parts, I enjoyed reading it as that kind of moment in time piece of literature. I'm going to continue that list, but I want to also be honest and tell you what else I read during this time. This was before I had my knee surgery still, and my partner and I listened to The Long Weekend and Holly by Stephen King, which is a book about mass kidnap and murderers who terrorize a small town. But it's set in the same kind of world as Mr. Mercedes. It's the same characters, and Holly is an investigator who's investigating these crimes. I'm not going to say what it's about. Check the trigger warnings before you read this book. But it was super enjoyable. We listened to it as an audiobook in the car. Probably would have given it 5 stars if it was an actual book. I think I gave it 4.5. Next, we read The Long Weekend, kind of on our way back from our trip. The Long Weekend by Gilly MacMillan. It's about a group of friends from university who take a trip. They take a trip? Yeah, they take a trip together. It's honestly not super memorable. We gave this book 3 stars. I think we agreed on it. It was fine. It's a thriller. It's set in England. They go on a trip together, or they're supposed to, but then some people back out. And then there's like some spooky stuff happens at a farmhouse, and it's really all over the place. And at one point, a farmer unalives himself because he has dementia. And it was like, the more I think about it, I'm like, was this a 3-star book? The narrator of this audiobook was excellent. So I'll try to find her name and put it right here. Next, I started to read The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It was recommended to me by my fiance's brother. And Nadim did a good job with his recommendation, even though it is hefty. It is 1,200 pages long. I made a reading vlog about this book, so if you're interested in hearing all of my like deepest, truest thoughts, actually I don't think they're very deep thoughts, there's just thoughts about this book, check out that reading vlog. It was different than I anticipated. The first 600 pages I would give like 3, the last 600 pages I would give like a 4.5, so in all it got a 4 from me. I really enjoyed this book. I liked Brandon Sanderson's writing style. The story was fantastic. My favorite character is Dalinar, if you've read it, which I don't think is a very popular opinion. However, I've heard that the 3rd book in this series focuses very much on him, so I'm very excited. Yeah, it's about a lot of things. Mostly we focus on a magic system where swords and armor are brought into being by people's feelings. There are several groups of people who are in the middle of a war, and it follows the 3 to 4 characters. There's a lot of characters in this book. I have a terrible memory, so I can't actually tell you all the names and things that happened, and like, but as I was reading it, I understood everything that was going on. I'm just like, this is not a book that I can summarize for you. I think I did a good job summarizing it. Maybe I didn't in my reading vlog, but it's high fantasy or epic fantasy. This magic system is really interesting, and it's all show and not tell. So if you like exposition, this would not be for you. It's extremely long because he shows you everything about the magic system, everything about the world. He doesn't really explain anything. It's just all like laid out. I was a big fan of that. However, the first 600 pages of that book were such a slog. I had to move on a little bit. Oh, I forgot to take it off the shelf. And moved on to my fiance's recommendation, which was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. He read this whole series, I think between April and July, and he adored it. So he recommended that I read the first one. Now, I didn't hate it, and I really thought I wasn't going to like it. So kudos to him for convincing me to read this, because I really didn't think I was going to enjoy this book at all. It is about Feyre, who is a human. She kills a wolf who ends up being actually part of the High Fae in this fairy world. So she's forced to leave her human world and go live in the fairy world. And then a bunch of stuff happens. And it's slightly spicy, but not really, and all the characters are very unlikable in my opinions in this book, but I hear they get more likable as the series goes on. However, I am not convinced that I will read any more of these books. I gave it 3 stars, but it was like a low 3 stars. I didn't give it anything less than that, because like that, I don't think that was fair. I didn't love it, but I didn't dislike it. I didn't find it like unreadable. I think the next book that I read was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and I read it on my Kindle, and this was one of the absolute most beautiful books that I have ever read. And like, I don't think it's considered a classic, but I think it should be. This is a book of stories that follows the life of a Okonkwo. He is a Nigerian man, and it follows like his upbringing into adulthood, how he raises his children, and how differently he raises his children to how his father raised him. And shows how his upbringing molded how he perceived women, other men, his children, and eventually the Christian missionaries that come into his tribe and tribes surrounding and try to convert them to Christianity. And they are sometimes successful, and how that makes things fall apart. Like I love this book so much that I really would like to read you some excerpts from it. Okay, so this was one of the first striking passages in this book, and it's very near the beginning. Perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear. The fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods and of magic. The fear of the forest and of the forces of nature. Malevolent, red in tooth and claw. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within him. It was the fear of himself, lest he should be found to resemble his father. And that's not even the most beautiful one. Like, I don't want to spoil anything for you or steal your first read of this book, so that's all I'm going to share with you. If that language touches you at all or makes you feel any feelings, please read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Oh, that came to me as a recommendation from my cousin Melissa. Oh, Melissa, thank you for introducing that book to me, and I look forward to reading the other two in that trilogy. A disjointed trilogy, so you don't necessarily need to read them in any one order, or you can read them as standalones, but I will definitely be reading the other two, because, man, that book was good. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads and 4.5 stars on Fable originally, but I keep thinking about it and how beautiful the writing was, and I really, really think that I'm gonna give it 5 stars. It was excellent. The next book I read was for my book club, and it was Lisa Jewell's The Family Remains. It's the sequel to The Family Upstairs, and it was fine. To be quite honest, there were a lot of holes in it. If you're like, oh, I like The Family Upstairs, like, kind of like on the fence about reading the next one, just don't. Honestly, it's not even that good. It brings in some other new characters that are interesting, but like, it's whatever. It's about a family who ends up being a part of a cult. A cult like invades their home in the first book, and that was cool. But the second one is about how one of the children who grows up in the first book to be a woman, which is generally how children work, they grow up to be adults. Her husband was very abusive and then marries someone else and is very abusive to her. So it's just a lot of DV, and there is a mystery, but like that, the mystery in this book, the ending was so boring. I feel like Lisa Jewell like had to write this book and pump it out like super quickly, which isn't fair to her, and it really isn't fair to her readers. So I'm not sure what the deal was. There should have been way more editing in this book. So the next book I read was The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and I like ate that book up. It's part of a trilogy, but the third is forthcoming and has been forthcoming for a long time. And people are frustrated with that. This was recommended to me by my cousin Kaylin and her husband Spencer. I read it on my Kindle for the most part. I also had the paper copy, but this is when I was like really healing up from my surgery, and I had a really hard time like holding it. It's like 800 pages long, or like 7 something pages long, and I just couldn't hold it. So I just read it on my Kindle, and I found it went really fast that way. I know it like is a polarizing book, but it's also extremely popular. The polarizing piece being like people absolutely love it, or just like are bored by it because they don't like the main character. It was pitched to me as Harry Potter but for adults, and as I started reading it, the first 100 pages, I'm like, how is this at all like Harry Potter other than he's an orphan? But then it is like Harry Potter but for adults, and it's fantastic. The main character, Quoth, is learning to be some kind of wizard. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, the people said the first 100 pages were boring. I loved them. I thought they were really cool. It was like an Oliver Twist vibe, and then but better because it was easier to read. And then it just like picks up in the last big chunk of it. It was just like action packed. I loved the middle section when he's like at school and like living his life. So if you're looking for something that is like reminiscent of Harry Potter, this might be for you. I have no real bad things to say about it. I gave it 5 stars. Probably could give it 4.5, but like that's just because usually I'm stingy with my stars, but I'm gonna give this one 5. Okay, so that was like a dense one, and I like took a real break and read my cousin Sagan's, who has she has a bookstagram, so go check her out. I'll link it in the bio, but this is her. She is a big reader, and I was really surprised that she recommended this book to me, and then it was exactly what I needed. I read it in a night, and it just hit exactly right. Which is weird because like the content of the book is kind of like, it could read as fatphobic if it was written in any other way, but it's not, because Stephen King is an amazing author and he would never do that. It's Elevation by Stephen King. If you're at a used bookstore in Canada, I don't know if it's like this in the States, but you will see like 100 copies of this in any used bookstore. Pick it up. It'll probably be really cheap. It's like, honestly, it reminds me of a lot of those like novellas that I used to read in French, which are like real short on each page as well, like big margins, not a lot of words. It is, oh no, I've had a hair on me this whole time. Probably have more, and you're gonna be like, take it off you. Sorry, like 140 something pages long, 146 pages long. It is about this man. I'm gonna sneeze. No, I'm good. It is about this man. Scott has an affliction. Scott loses weight extremely quickly, all of a sudden. Weighs less and less every day, can't explain it. Doesn't matter how heavy his coat is, doesn't matter how many like marbles he has in his pocket, he just weighs less and less every day. And he's leading up to the day when he weighs 0 pounds. He tells a doctor about it. Dr. Bob is like, wow, this is wild. I've never heard of anything like this. This seems like completely against anything in the laws of physics or medicine. So he's very invested in Scott's case. And Scott is also, for some reason, in a feud with this couple who happen to be lesbians who live on his block, and they like, one of them like hates him, and they own a restaurant. It's not doing very well because everybody in the town is super bigoted, and they end up kind of finding common ground, and the story just moves on from there. Almost bawled my eyes out at the end of this book, but I was so friggin' exhausted, having like finally recovered somewhat from knee surgery and going back to work and like all that jazz, that I just sat there staring at the ceiling. But this book was fantastic, and I gave it 4.5 stars because I didn't stop thinking about it for a whole week. All right, next, I jumped like straight back into the gym at this point, and I started reading A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a, I guess, like dark romantasy book about Constanta, who is Dracula's wife, and then Dracula's other wife, and they never get married. He calls the 2 women his wives, but then he has this partner who's a man, but he's not his husband. He's like a much younger vampire. And how they feel deceived by Dracula and are like entangled in this passionate relationship that they all feel slighted in. It was really good. My cousin Megan recommended this book to me, and it's not a book that I would ever pick up. She's really into this dark fantasy stuff, and it was friggin' great. Like, it was a really quick read. I listened to parts of it as an audiobook and read the rest of it, and I would recommend, if you do read this as an audiobook, like, try to read the beginning and the end, because the writing is so rich. It reads like a spicy classic. Let's put it that way. I gave it 3.5 stars. I mean, it sounds low, but like, I'm a stingy star giver. 3.5 stars, like, this was really, really good. For example, I adored Elevation. I gave it 4 stars. I almost want to give A Court of Thorns and Roses 2 stars. It's hard for me. I didn't hate it, but like, the more I thought about it, the less I liked it. And I found it was so expository. She just explained everything instead of like showing us. Like, I'm gonna have to lower this to 2.5. I just was surprised that I didn't hate it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars when I really shouldn't have. My stepbrother Sean recommended Christine by Stephen King. I know now that he has not read this book. He just really likes the movie, and I haven't seen the movie, so I should do that. Maybe I'll do that as part of spooky season. Another Stephen King. Honestly, it was good. I don't have really anything like terribly horrible to say about it. This book is about a teenager named Arnie Cunningham in like the 80s, and his friend Dennis happen upon a car on their way home from work one day. It's this car. It's Christine. Christine is possessed. And Christine is scary as hell, and I don't want to give too much away. Dennis is the narrator of this book, which makes it really interesting. So it's from a teenage boy's perspective. Arnie's his best friend. Arnie buys Christine from an old man. The old man dies, and then a whole bunch of weird stuff happens with this car. Arnie gets super obsessed with this car, and this car causes so much trouble for him. It's just like ruins this boy's life. And Dennis recounts the story, and it's heartbreaking because it's this kid who's like slowly losing his best friend because of a freaking car. Arnie's obsessed. He just absolutely adores Christine, and she's the only thing in the world to him. And for 700 and some pages, you're frustrated with Arnie and you feel for Dennis. It's like gory in some parts. People get like run over and torn to shreds and stuff like that, but it's not scary. It's just really sad. It has the same vibes as Carrie, where you're just like, wow, those poor people. But at the same time, ew, that's so gross. That's what this book made me feel. So I gave it 3.5 stars because it wasn't like, if people are like, this is peak Stephen King, but you read that on every single book jacket. Vintage King is what it says on this one too. But he's really good at writing in the time that he's writing. So this book is set in the 80s, written in the 80s, narrated by a teenage boy. So if you're sensitive to like the R word, which I am, and the derogatory slang F word, this probably wouldn't be for you. However, recognizing that this is narrated by a teenage boy in the 80s, like I just overlooked those words. Thoroughly enjoyed it. If you like cars, if you're interested in kind of inserting yourself into like the horror genre, this probably wouldn't be the best for Stephen King to read, but it would be a good like third Stephen King book to read. Okay, the next book I finished, I listened to in a day. It was an audiobook that I like really enjoyed actually. For the most part, the end was like left a lot to be desired, to be quite honest. And that was The Fake by Zoe Whittall. And for the same reason that I gave Stephen King's Christine 3.5 stars, just like didn't tie up the way I wanted it to, had a lot of potential and then didn't quite hit all the right marks. The Fake, it's set in Toronto, so that's fun, and it's set in real locations in Toronto, so that's kind of like, I like that. Like I'm in Toronto all the time, so that was cool. It is about this young woman. Her wife dies suddenly, and she meets this girl at her grief group who's in her early 20s, whose sister has died, and she has cancer. This man who's recently divorced and like really grappling with that and like not feeling very handsome or sexual is trying to put himself into the dating sphere and meets the same girl and finds out that she is going through cancer treatment. Kind of at the same time as each other, they both realize that this girl is faking it. She doesn't have cancer and they want to do something about it. So we follow, their paths, and that's it. I enjoyed the dual perspective narration on the audiobook. That's all I gotta say about this book. I gave it like 3.5 stars. I'd probably re-review it at this point and give it a 3. It was enjoyable, and if you live in Toronto, it's actually kind of fun to read. The last 2 books that I listened to and read were phenomenal. These 2 books were recommendations from my friend Keitha and my fiance's sister-in-law, Anam. Man, they were friggin' killer books, man. The first book I listened to, no, I didn't listen to it, I completely read it, and I annotated it too because I loved it so much, was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Came out in 2015, and it's about a global pandemic. But in this pandemic, 90% of the world dies. And it follows the lives of 3 people. One was a little girl who is part of a troupe of actors and orchestra musicians, and they go around the continent of North America performing Shakespeare. She had started out as a young girl in Toronto in a Shakespeare play, King Lear, where King Lear dies of a heart attack on stage. Then the pandemic starts. The man who tries to save King Lear is the other character that we follow in this book. He is a journalist turned paramedic. He leaves everything behind, doesn't escape the pandemic with anybody, and we see where he goes from there. And the last person we follow is the actor who played King Lear, his best friend. And his best friend is such an interesting character and ends up being what kind of ties a couple of the other characters together by the end of this book. And the way all of the stories intermingle and connect is amazing and beautiful. If you start reading it and think that you're gonna get like a cult aspect to it, you're not, okay? Like, put that out of your mind. I got very excited about that, and then it didn't happen, which is totally fine. And I thought the writing was amazing. It was so easy to read, and I like had a really hard time putting it down. The first thing I annotated was they were silent again. Someone made a comment about the snow coming down hard, and it was. They could see it through the glass doors at the far end of the lobby. From the bar, the snow was almost abstract. A film about bad weather on a deserted street. And this last one, I see everything. It's nothing. She had once met an old man near Kincardine who'd sworn that the murdered follow their killers to the grave. And she was thinking of this as they walked. The idea of dragging souls across the landscape, like cans on a string. Highly recommend Station 11. I gave it 4.5 stars, but if the first few chapters strike you as interesting, you might give it 5 stars, because this book was phenomenal. I can't quite explain why I didn't give it 5 stars. I think it was just the ending again. I wish I had enjoyed the ending more, and like the cult piece could have been explored a little bit more for me. Before I read the last amazing book that was recommended to me, I unfortunately listened to The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. Why did no one tell me that book was bad? I thought it was like a really popular, good book. I listened to it at the gym and it just was so not good. It's about this girl who's looking for her brother who she's supposed to be staying with, but he's like suddenly missing, and the people in this apartment are somehow connected to him, and she's getting weird vibes, and then somebody like roofies her at one point. The twists in this book I called from the beginning, and then the way the story wrapped up was so... I just did not care about a single character in this book. I was not invested in this girl's story. I didn't care if she found her brother, and the timeline made literally no sense to me. I don't understand how this was such a popular book, and I'm really sorry that I don't think I'll be reading another Lucy Foley, because it was just bad. I give it 2 stars, or like 2.5 stars maybe. I keep forgetting that I've read more books. And then after that, I listened to another book at the gym. I read After That Night by Karin Slaughter, which is a Will Trent book. Didn't know that when I started it. It's the 11th Will Trent book, but apparently it's one of those books that like you don't need to read the rest of the series to understand what's going on, which is great. It's just like an Agatha Christie novel. You can read any of them. This was genuinely about a grape club. This was a really heavy book, written in a very light way. Like, not in a way that was like detracting from the content, but it was very easy to listen to, and the narration was really good, and I feel like if I read the physical version of it, I would have read it all the way through and it would have been a really quick read. But like, on no page did they not mention grape. So, or some form of essay. So just keep that in mind. It's an intense book. It's really good though. So if you're looking for a book that's like talks a lot about like the medical aspects of essay in a way that like doesn't like feel icky, and talks about the mental health repercussions of essay and DA, as well as exploring what healthy and unhealthy relationships are, all in murder mystery thriller book. This might be for you. Like Karin Slaughter, I never read anything by her, and listening to this was like pretty entertaining and quite jarring at times, but good writing. Finally, we got our last recommended book, and that was The Moor's Account by Leila Lalami, and it was recommended to me by my fiance's sister-in-law. Anna, my goodness, you have excellent taste in books. I really didn't know if I was enjoying this book for like the first quarter of it, and then it started to pick up, and I realized, man, I really like this writing. I listened to it just because I wanted to get it done, and I couldn't put the book down. Like, I was listening to it at the gym and just like enthralled by it, just because I didn't want to stop reading. And then as soon as I would stop doing my like workout like my actual like weights and stuff and started doing my cardio, I picked up my Kindle, I put it on the treadmill, and I just like plowed through chapter after chapter on the treadmill. Absolutely loved it, and probably really helped my my knee healing process because I was just so zoned in on this. I just want to read to you the plot summary because I genuinely don't think I can do it justice, so I want to make sure that I get it all right. The Moor's Account is a historical fiction book. In 1527, the conquistador Panfilo de Narvaez left the port of Sanlúcar to Barrameda in Spain with a crew of more than 500 men. His goal was to claim what is now the Gulf Coast of the United States for the Spanish crown, and in the process become as wealthy as and as famous as Hernan Cortez. So this is the account of a Muslim Moroccan slave who begins and ends his life as Mustafa al-Zamori, but in the time that he is on this expedition is called Estebanico, so his name is pulled away from him. He's renamed, and honestly, his story is wild. Like, it's heartbreaking by the end and in the middle and just all over the place. He is one of 4 survivors of this expedition. They run into every possible trouble they can get into, from disease to obviously misunderstanding and invading indigenous territory where they are murdered, they drown. There's everything possible happens on this expedition. And by the end, Mustafa is left to tell his story. This book is a 5-star book. I gave it 4 and I'm bringing it up to 5 because like it was so good. I would recommend this to so many different people. The writing was beautiful. It took a little bit to get into it, but I have still been thinking about it and I finished it a few weeks ago. Fantastic book. Thank you, Autumn, for that one. So I read a whole slew of books. And I am so happy that I read every single one of these because they got me through that knee surgery, and I feel loved. People recommended me some of their favorite books and some books that they just thought that I would absolutely adore, and I'm sorry that I didn't love all of them, but I loved most of them. I've had a few other books recommended to me since I posted the video where I introduced all the books that I was going to read. So I'm looking forward to reading some of my other friends' recommendations. But for now, thank you so much for joining me on my renewed reading journey. My name is Paige. These were the books that I read. Like, subscribe, follow me on Fable and Goodreads, and social media if you want to see random reels about books that I'm reading. Thanks so much for joining me this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, bye-bye!